Hello everyone and welcome back. It's Jessa, and tonight we are exploring the great dynastic family of the Romanovs, who ruled over Russia from 1613 to 1917, when they were overthrown by a Bolshevik revolution, and Nicholas II was assassinated along with his family in 1918. We are going to encounter a wild period of history that I can only begin to lightly touch. We're going to hear a lot about the succession of power in regards to the Romanovs and all the things they would do to each other for power, like putting babies in prison, murdering one's husband, murdering one's father, all kinds of things. And we'll also hear about the kind of Russian Imperial Guard's relationship to power and the Tsar as well. Now, the reason I'm doing this video is because currently in my membership, we are reading Anna Karenina. And Anna Karenina takes place in the 1870s, which was an important transitional time for Russia. Serfdom was abolished in 1861 by Alexander II, a very important Tsar. And as a result, so much reorganization to Russian society had to occur. And Anna Karenina is taking place in the backdrop of that, as the country is thinking about, or the empire really, is thinking about major social questions, like the woman question. Do women have freedom? Do they have equality? The peasant question, the music, I think is what they're called, the music question. What rights do they have now that they are no longer tied to their lord through legal means? This is occurring in this book. That's the backdrop. In order to understand that political shift, we really need to know what the country was shifting from. And that's why I wanted to do this video, really talking about the development of the Tsar and the power behind the Tsar, the central autocracy that the Tsar demanded from the nobility, how the Tsar carefully stripped power away from the boyars, which was the older nobility. Really want to explore that, how serfdom was actually begun, so on and so forth. So that's why we're going to think about power's relationship to people in Russia and Romanov relationship to people, because in Russia, power was so defined by the Romanov dynasty. So the reason I'm on the floor is because I have a lot of books that I want to talk about, and I want to use visuals, so I'm not going to be in the video much. I'm just going to turn the camera around, and we're really going to look at a few books. So this is one that I've gotten a lot of information from, which is Alexander II. This is an incredibly readable book about Alexander II's reign. So I would suggest it. It is by Edward Rudzinski. And he wrote The Last Tsar as well, which is about Nicholas II. So if you are interested, I would suggest getting this book. So I'm going to show you a few passages from this one. I also have the Memoirs of Catherine the Great, and she's going to give us a really good look at Peter III, who succeeded Empress Elizabeth, who is a really, really important Tsar, and she's actually the lady who put a baby in prison and did not have children of her own. Peter III was her nephew, the nephew of her sister the son of her sister, who died of smallpox, and Empress Elizabeth loved her sister, so it was very tragic for her. At the same time, her mother died, and her fiance died. I'm not sure what her mother died of, but I know her fiance died of smallpox. So it was a tough time for Empress Elizabeth. She was not empress at the time that this happened. So we're going to hear a little bit about Peter III, who was a notorious idiot. From her, or Catherine the Great, rather, describes him as a notorious idiot. There are a few stars we're not going to touch so much. We're not going to touch Catherine the Great, because she is so great that she needs her own video. So we're not going to look at her too much. We're not even going to get to Nicholas II in this video, so there will be more videos to come. We're not going to touch Alexander II yet either. We're just looking at the people who helped make Alexander II. And we're really going to stop at Peter III and not get any farther than that. When we talk about Alexander II, we'll also talk about Nicholas I, because Nicholas I was very violent. He was terrified of being killed because his father, Paul I, was killed, and by an uprising of the guards. Anytime a Tsar did something politically foreign, some kind of foreign political move that the guards didn't like, they basically would stage a coup. And with Paul I, Alexander, his son, was actually supportive of that coup, and really contributed to his father's murder. And of course the murder was not called a murder. They said he died of natural causes, but it was very obvious that he had been murdered by people associated with the Imperial Guard. So we're not really going to get to Nicholas I, who was so violent, because his violence really set the stage for Alexander II to appear. And Alexander II also was murdered. So being a Romanov was pretty dangerous. And Nicholas I actually did not want to be Tsar. When Alexander, his brother, said, I'm done, and asked Nicholas to take over in his stead, Nicholas was like, nah, I'm good. But he ended up doing it anyway. And being so violent in order to show the people that he was powerful and they should not uprise against him. So we're not going to touch that yet. So we should take about, I think, 3 or 4 Romanov videos to really get through them, and that's really designed to help with Anna Karenina. So if you haven't signed up and you're interested, please go ahead. We are reading those books together, and by the end of it we should have a pretty good understanding of this Russian period of history, which is good to know considering Russia is such an important world power that makes a lot of big political decisions, that it's good to know the background of someone before, or of a country, when their leader is making such enormous and very violent and devastating political choices, particularly in regards to war and expansion. So that's that. I'm going to turn the camera around now, and we're gonna look at a breakdown of the Romanovs. Okay, so thank you for joining me. Let's go. Okay, so let's begin. This is a family tree of the Romanov dynasty. It doesn't begin with the first Romanov Tsar, which was Michael I. He should be up here somewhere. He is the one that ended or really stabilized Russia following the time of troubles, and brought some economic prosperity to the area, or to the country. It wasn't until Peter the Great, who appears here, Peter I, that Russia really becomes an empire, and Peter I is the first emperor of Russia. So we'll begin with Alexis, Tsar Alexis. He ruled from 1645 to 1676. And he is important because he established serfdom in Russia, which is different than the American institution of slavery. Russia was actually rather disturbed, particularly Nicholas I, by the American institution of slavery. They thought it was violent and morally corrupt. But the Russian system of serfdom was really no better. There was still incredible violence, even if, I believe it was Catherine the Great established rules keeping the lords from committing acts of violence against their serfs. Certainly they did happen. So in serfdom, Russian peasants are tied to their landlords. So the landowner did not own the serfs as American slave owners would own the enslaved people, the chattel essentially. Instead, their relationship was based on land. So the lord would own the land, and the people on the land, the serfs, were tied to the lord, tied to serving that land. And what they yielded went to that lord. So the serfs were not really allowed to leave the area that they lived on. So they were very much like chattel slaves. They could not depart. So they were like American enslaved people in that way. They were not able to leave, and they could have been exchanged. So oftentimes these serfs were treated like chattel and enslaved people. But in 1649, you can see only 4 years into Alexis's reign, he established in the legal code total authority of the landowner over serfs that live on the land, which completely debilitated and made illegal the serf's ability to move elsewhere. Now, the reason that Alexis did this was that he had the intention to bring the nobility under the power of the Tsar. So giving the nobility this kind of power over the people working and farming their land was something that was very advantageous to the Tsar, and really consolidated the Tsar's power. And he started asking for military service from the nobility as well, which was another way to bring them under the Tsar's authority. The Romanovs were very interested in stripping the nobility of their power and consolidating the power under that one man, that one woman who led the country. And it was Peter the Great that did the most effective consolidation of power by taking away the birthright, which was essentially that as to become nobility you had to be born into it. Well, Tsar Peter, the Emperor Peter, said, no, you can become noble through extraordinary acts as well, by great acts of service, which established for him a very, very loyal group of new nobility that would take his side in any sort of attempted coup or any battle with the old Russian nobility. So he essentially created a whole entire noble class to serve him. So that was really starting with Alexis. Now, Peter I is the son of Alexis, but by a different marriage than over here, Ivan V. Now, Alexis, you can see here, married Maria Miloslavna and also Natalia Narishkina. And this was his first wife over here, Maria, and his second wife was Natalia. And so there proceeded, of course, a great battle for the power over Russia, led by Sophia here, that would be Peter's half-sister. So she took over, essentially, and ruled as regent from 1682 to 1689, until Peter led a rebellion to take her away. She was regent, ruling through Ivan V. Now, Ivan V here was mentally and physically disabled, so he wasn't a very active ruler. It was really Sophia that was in charge of things. And when Peter I came to overthrow her, Ivan V and Peter actually ruled as co-tsars. But Ivan V, being disabled, did not actually have an active role in government. And so it really was Peter I's Russia until he became sole emperor of the country after great military successes in which he gained for Russia access to the Baltic Sea. So let's think about Peter I now. I'm going to go ahead and open up my notes and go to Peter I. Okay, so I decided to turn the camera around because I don't have a lot of visuals for Peter the Great. So I'll talk to you and then I'll turn the camera back around after. So Peter the Great, is one of those transformative rulers, and he really wanted to create Russia as an empire, like a really strong military power. He wanted to really change the way that Russia worked and bring it into what he considered the modern age, to fashion it after the Western European powers like Sweden. And so he made a lot of changes, and we'll kind of think why, because we'll begin with what he thought of the Russian people, and he did not think well of the Russian people at all. He considered the Russian people to be lazy and rude, unintelligent, and very lazy students, and he believed that the state had a responsibility to transform people, and he really began that transformation in the military. So he believed that fear and violence were excellent for controlling people. And he's not wrong, unfortunately. So he created this great, wonderful military. And there were a lot of really key moves that he made. He made it so if you were a member of the military, and you were a very high-performing member of the military, you could actually reach a position of nobility. And so you no longer had to be born a noble in order to belong to the military. Now, of course, he did this because he did not think very well of Russian aristocracy. In fact, he thought that they were rather backwards. They were entrenched in this kind of agricultural feudalist society. They were not well educated. They were rather foolish. And in Anna Karenina, you see the same perspective really discussed by Levin, a member of the nobility, but who is very critical of the nobility for their inability to really understand what's happening in Russia, because they are not close to it. So he looked down on the Russian nobility and decided to destroy them, essentially, by allowing new nobility through their service. So if you served the country, you could join the noble class, and one of those ways was through the military. So he created two new, essentially, aspects of the military. Let me see if I can find what they're called. I will never in a million years remember them. Let's see. Okay, the Preobrazhensky and the Semyonovsky. I don't know how to pronounce this. It's Semyonovsky. So Preobrazhensky and the Semyonovsky. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Let's see if you can see how I spelled it. I spelled it right there. And normally I look up the pronunciation of words, but I forgot to do it. I'm sorry. Those are the two military branches he created. Now, this was a huge difference from the military that Ivan the Terrible created. So he created this military. I forget the name of it, so let me look up the name real quick. I have my computer here. Ivan the Terrible. You see me? Ivan the Terrible military guard name. Let's look up what the military guard name is. No, that's not the name. You know where it is? I believe it's in this book. I know it starts with an S, so let's look it up. We can go straight to the index and we'll find it. There are always so many things to remember when you're learning, and I'm learning about this really for the first time, so it's pretty fascinating. Let's go S. I'm certain that I will be able to find it here. There's just so many S words in this book. Stroganoff. I don't think that's it. Alright, so let's do this. I'm gonna get close to the microphone. I could just read through every single S word for you. until I find it. I'm determined to find it, even though I don't think it's really important that you know what it's called. Sorry, you're just staring at my head. There we go. Oh, where is it? Okay, we'll never know. Maybe I'll find it later, and if somebody knows, put it in the comments. Unless I go through the book, where it might say, no, I don't know where it is. Oh, this is Peter the Great's pal. I know it's somewhere. Well, anyway, it wasn't a very strong military, and it was designed to protect the Tsar, and it was actually what Sophia worked with to establish her power. And so Peter the Great actually had to defeat that particular unit. And so when he was creating his new military unit, it was really to bring Russia to a stronger position, but also to obliterate that other military operation that was much older, but also much less effective because it wasn't as established, and there was no training, and there was really no pathway into it. But it was really because they were loyal to Sophia. They were loyal to his stepmother's line, not his, to Alexis' first wife, not the second, and to which Peter the Great was born. So he creates this new military and also establishes what is called the table of ranks, which again is what I was talking about, where he says that through service you can enter the ranks of the nobility, which would weaken the power of the old nobility with whom he was really opposed about what Russia should look like. He wanted Russia to be a modern power and to more resemble the beliefs of the Enlightenment, which his daughter, Empress Elizabeth, would later finish or really establish with the offering of free education. But anyway, okay, so let's get back to it. Peter the Great is really Peter the Great because he turned Russia into an empire, and he did so with this great military he created. He actually ended up winning the Great Northern War against Sweden, which is extraordinary because Sweden was a very strong military power, and Russia really was a burgeoning one, a new one. They were really a strong military power, so the fact that he was able to do that was extraordinary. And so he then declared himself emperor, and he established in the Baltic region St. Petersburg as the capital city of this great empire. So he created St. Petersburg, and that really became the seat of the Romanovs, with Catherine I and Peter. Let's go back to the family tree. Is it Peter II? I can't remember all the Peters. There are 3 of them. Catherine II and Peter III. Sorry. Catherine II and Peter III would later live in the Winter Palace, which became really the seat of the Romanovs on the Neva River. So he founded St. Petersburg, and that would become the ruling central city for the entire dynastic rule of the Romanovs all the way to 1917, when, of course, the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks, would take over and change everything to just wipe away any history of the Romanovs and the Tsars. The Tsars as Romanovs. Okay. So, one of the other amazing things about Peter the Great, is that he married a serf, and that would become Catherine I. Her name was Marta, and she was an orphan, and she was found by a military officer when they were invading the Baltic region and occupying those territories. And she was brought back to serve as a mistress for an officer. And it was then that Peter the Great discovered her, and she was brought to him. There was really weird thing that was said about it, if I can find it. A quote, which is about her. Let's see if I find it. I can't seem to find anything today. No, I can't find it. I need to get better at highlighting things, but so she was brought, and Peter I was amazed by her beauty. She was very, very beautiful, completely illiterate, mind you, because she was a serf. She had no formal education, and she was working as a cook for a Lutheran pastor at the time, after she became an orphan. And so she was brought to Peter I's room as his mistress, but they fell in love. And rather than just casting her out again, as would often happen to mistresses, he ended up marrying her in a secret ceremony. And so their children, perhaps we should turn the camera around now so we can look at these people. Let's do that. We're just going to put you right down. We're just going to go. Okay, so their children here, Elizabeth II, sorry, I keep saying that, Elizabeth and Anna were born, it appeared, out of wedlock, but they weren't actually, because of that secret wedding. After Peter I had established himself as emperor and had full military control and in consolidated power to the Tsar, he was able to publicly marry Marta, and her name became Catherine I. And she, as an illiterate peasant woman, would later, as you can see, follow Peter I after his death, and would rule not for a very long time, because she died rather quickly, only ruled for about 2 years. But she would, peasant woman, essentially illiterate peasant woman, would be ruling over Russia, which is one thing that is really fascinating about Russian history. That Peter the Great essentially fell in love with a woman, and rather than marrying for political purposes, he married for love, which is very rare at this time. He had a loving relationship with his wife, and it was said that she was one of the only people who could calm him down from his rages. He would get into terrible, terrible rages, and he would rule. He would be known to whip people, his advisors, and so on and so forth, when he was upset, which is not an abnormal thing that happened in Russia. So we'll take a segue to hear about that very briefly. But Catherine was really the only person who was able to calm him down. Let's see. So while I'm finding it, I'll talk a little bit more about Catherine. So, she ended up having, with Peter I, 12 children, but only, I think, only 2 survived until the age of 7. So it was a very, very difficult life. But anyway, let's turn to learn about the episodes of violence that occur against the nobility from the Tsars, to show you how much they really consolidated power. I'm trying to find the page 42. This happened during Catherine the Great's reign, but it's something like, she certainly would have learned from Peter the Great's. Is it really 42? It seems wrong, but we'll go to 42. Okay. Yes, right here. So we're going to read from this page very briefly about what would happen. So, a scary story started spreading about the 3rd Department. It was said that in the building on the Fontanka Canal, Shishkovsky's room, with its special floor, was still in use. So we're going to hear about Shishkovsky. The 3rd Department, this was created during Nicholas I's rule, I believe. Are we in Nicholas I right now? Yes, Nicholas I. He created the most autocratic rule, I think, that Russia had seen from the Romanovs, which involved an intense censorship campaign. But anyway, during Catherine the Great's rule, this is Catherine II, Shishkovsky's room existed. with its special floor, which was still in use, and this looks a lot like what Peter I would do in his rages. In the reign of Catherine the Great, Shishkovsky was the unofficial chief of the secret police. The Empress, who corresponded with Voltaire, had done away with torture, but the whip survived. Shishkovsky found a handy use for it. A free-thinking nobleman would be called in for a talk. Shishkovsky would be extremely amiable, offer a comfortable chair, and then give a mild lecture. The person being rebuked would think that he was getting off lightly when Shishkovsky would turn to the abundance of icons in his office and pray fervently and loudly. The floor beneath the erring gentleman would suddenly sink down and the chair seat fall away, exposing his nether regions to people armed with switches. Stealthy hands would pull away his trousers, and the nobleman would be whipped long and hard like a slave until his buttocks bled. The miserable victim would scream in pain and damn Shishkovsky, who continued at his prayers. The same hands would pull up the victim's trousers, smooth his shirt, and send the chair back up. Shishkovsky would turn and gently resume the conversation as if nothing happened. And then the regiment would learn of this, and essentially Shishkovsky, or the nobility, would be stripped of their titles. So you could join the nobility when not of birth, but you also could be stripped from it. So it didn't give the Tsar a lot of power, because if you can be turned into nobility through service, you can be removed from it through a lack of it. So, yes, Peter the Great would have practices like these. A very violent, very angry Tsar who could only be cooled by his great love, Catherine I. Now, Peter I took away the law that said that the next Tsar's succession would be the next male heir. So he took that away and essentially made a law that said that the Tsar could choose their own successor. This is probably because, as you note, he had no sons through Catherine I. And he only had a son with... actually, did he have a son with Eudoxia? We forgot all about Eudoxia, so why don't we talk about Eudoxia for a second. This is his first wife, who he ended up forcing to join a nunnery, which was I guess this was a punishment. Elizabeth would also almost be forced to join a nunnery by, I believe it was Anna over here, who hated her. Or was it the regent? It might have been... No, yes, it was Anna over here, hated Elizabeth and was working very hard to get Elizabeth into a nunnery because she was frightened that Elizabeth would challenge her for the throne. But Elizabeth avoided it by overthrowing Ivan VI, I think. Now I'm getting confused. There are so many Annas. Let's see. We'll get there and then I'll know because it's in my notes. But anyway, okay. So, let's move on to Eudoxia. So, after 2 years, let's see. Yes, Eudoxia. We'll move on from Eudoxia. Eudoxia's grandson was Peter II. Now I'm getting confused. Let me restart. Okay. So Eudoxia is his first wife. She ends up in a convent. She actually had an affair, and she was drawing up some military power against Peter I because of some changes he made to the churches in Russia. He was trying to consolidate church power under the Tsar as well, and she was backed by some of those Russian church leaders. And so Peter I kind of destroyed her and forced her into a nunnery because of that. But anyway, so when he grew ill and died, he had not actually said who would be heir. And he probably said that it would no longer be the next male because he was worried about Ivan's side over here through Maria taking over control again. So he took away that and said instead that he would choose his heir. But he never did choose one. And that was the wild thing. He gave the Tsar all this power to choose an heir, and he never did. So Catherine I rose after, and she was supported by the military to come to, or the Russian Guard, to come to power. Okay, so I'm back. Okay, so following the death of Catherine I, there was question about who should rule next. Now, Elizabeth seemed like a very good option, but instead it was Peter II who was chosen. I don't think that Elizabeth really wanted the crown at that time. Peter II was very young, and he ended up dying at 14 of smallpox. So he was very much like a figurehead ruler, a puppet king, you might say, who was ruled by his advisors, and they really made the decisions for him. And again, he died at the age of 14 of smallpox. Now, Empress Elizabeth at this time, I'm sorry, I should stop saying Empress Elizabeth. Elizabeth, Peter the Great's daughter, at this time was living quite a life, and so it makes sense that she might not want to come to power. It was, she was difficult to marry. Catherine I wanted to marry her off, but she had trouble getting any of these great European families that she wished to marry her daughter to seek a marriage with her, because she was considered very much close to an illegitimate daughter, being the daughter of a peasant woman. And even though she was not illegitimate because of this secret marriage, and she was formally made legitimate in the public marriage, those European families wanted nothing to do with her. And it was Peter the Great who really established that the Tsars and the nobility at this time would be interested in marrying into Western European families, particularly, for instance, Catherine the Great. Catherine II was from a German, a Prussian family, and so there was a lot of emphasis on bringing those powers and forming those alliances to make Russia more powerful on an international stage. But it was hard, again, to marry Elizabeth off, and the same with Anna, her sister. And so Anna was eventually married off to a duke, I believe a duke from what is now Germany. It wasn't at the time, but I forget what it was called. So a part of what is now Germany, she was married off. And there she had a son who was Peter III. So she had a son, Peter III. But shortly after having this son, she died of smallpox. And this was about the same time that Catherine I ended up dying. And then later, Peter II would die of smallpox. So you see a lot of people in Elizabeth's life were dying. And she was married off to a similar man, another duke like her sister, but that marriage never occurred because he also died of smallpox. So poor Elizabeth. So Elizabeth's really not interested in being Tsar at this time. And so Peter II comes into power, but again rules for a very short period of time, having died of smallpox. And so the question became, who would succeed Peter II? Certainly a lot of military leaders that were loyal to Peter the Great's line would wish Empress Elizabeth to come to power, but that does not unfold. So following Peter II's death, it was not Elizabeth who would come to power. Elizabeth was very much living her life. She had fallen in love with a choral singer, actually, following the death of her potential fiancé. She had fallen in love with him, and like her father, really spent her entire life with him. They were never formally married, but she loved him very dearly, and had him by her side for most of her life. So she, again, very similar to her father, fell in love with someone of a much lower rank. He was just a choral singer. Anyway, and he was very, very loyal to her for her entire, as long as they knew each other. So, who follows is Anna Ivanovna, who is of the Maria's line, of Ivan's line. If you remember when there was the co-regent with Peter I and Sophia, it's of that line. So essentially Peter the Great's line loses influence at this moment, and Anna takes over. And Anna hates Elizabeth because Elizabeth is really seen as having a birthright and a rightful place on the throne. So Anna is very suspicious of her, very paranoid, and Anna is actually known for her paranoia and her cruelty. And there are lots of ways she's very careful about everything that Elizabeth does to avoid her taking the throne. Following Anna, the one who is chosen to rule is Ivan VI. And Ivan VI is only an infant when he's chosen to rule. So it's another Anna, his mother, who becomes regent of Russia. Okay, so right here, this is in Exen, Alexander II, the last great Tsar. He writes, after the death of Catherine I, her daughter Elizabeth found herself in reduced circumstances. The elderly associates of Peter the Great turned to the prince and princesses Braunschweig, the children of Peter's brother Ivan, to rule the country. Their infant son, Johann Antonovich, still in his cradle, was pronounced emperor. The regent during his childhood was to be his mother, Princess Anna Leopoldovna. Now you see this book has some weird moments where I think like the history isn't like 100% correct, because they completely skip over. In the book, he completely skips over Anna here, who ruled for 10 whole years. Before Ivan VI was installed. So I don't really know why he does that, but he kind of picks and chooses what he says. So when reading this book, be aware of that. Like, not everything feels perfectly researched, but more dramatic than researched. But the visitors from Braunschweig did not appreciate how dangerous the Russian guards could be. But the daughter of Peter the Great did. Elizabeth had been born before her parents' marriage. She was declared legitimate. Okay, I already told us all this. But this is where they talk about how beautiful she was. She was, the love child was very attractive, with thick red hair and divine porcelain skin with a rosy blush. Her figure was most tempting. She was tall, with a high bosom and long legs. One German diplomat fainted when he first beheld her. She was extremely passionate. This is when they talk about the lover that I already told us about. But here is where she plans this takeover, to take over the throne at the behest. Really, the Russian guard wished her to do this. So Elizabeth's portrait showed a strong, willful jaw, her ruthless father's jaw. She gave herself up to love, but the red-haired Elizabeth did not forget about power. Peter's child did not want to live in obscurity, so she turned to the guards. On a cold November night in 1741, a sleigh surrounded by 300 guardsmen rode down Nevsky Prospect. Elizabeth was in the sleigh, headed for the royal palace. Along the way, the guardsmen cheerfully arrested the sleepy aristocrats who lived along the palace embankment. With jokes and jibes, they sent Regent Anna Leopoldovna's main associates from their beds straight to prison. As they approached the palace, Elizabeth stopped the sleigh to reduce the noise. The guardsmen carried the beauty the rest of the way to the palace. When the watchman tried to sound the alarm by beating his drum, an officer ran his sword through the drumhead. The palace was taken without resistance. There are many stories of the guards really planning these great resistances that the Tsars did not even know were going on. And so that was a huge problem that Nicholas I, because he was like, how is it that we have no idea that these are being planned, and sometimes we do know, and yet we do nothing? And so he was responsible for destroying the Decembrist Revolution, which we'll learn about in the next video. But he did so by getting a lot of secret informants working through extreme censorship, and getting the nobility to act as informants as well. So he's very good at that. And ensuring that no one would rise up against him. So, let's see, a surveillance state of a sort. All right, time to rise, sister, Elizabeth said, awakening the regent of the empire. The nocturnal revolution was victorious. The regent was sent to the fortress along with the rest of her family. That's Ivan's mother. Elizabeth herself brought the child emperor in her own sleigh. The boy laughed happily, reaching for the guardsman. Elizabeth kissed him and sighed, "Poor child." He suffered life imprisonment in the Schlüsselburg fortress. The former emperor of all Russia grew up in a prison cell. Not knowing why he had ended up there, the fortress guards eventually killed him. His wretched parents rotted to death. I believe it was Catherine II who ordered his death, just to ensure that he never took the throne. The morning after the coup, Elizabeth declared herself Empress and Colonel of the Guards Regiment. She had respect for them. It was not to be their last regime change. And so Elizabeth I ruled, and she was a fascinating figure. Let me move that. Let me get my notes on her, and we can look at it. Let's see. Okay, so she helped bring about the Age of Enlightenment in Russia. She brought free education, not to everyone. Anyone could technically use it, but the serfs. The serfs were not allowed to. By helping to build the University of Moscow and also the Imperial Academy of the Arts, which was begun in 1757. So that offered free education to a limited number of spots. So very similar to Peter the Great, who started to offer pathways to nobility. She offered pathways to education. Still very limited in scope. Obviously, a peasant was not likely to end up there. And serfs were completely barred from it, being unable to leave their land. But she did establish the University of Moscow. She had incredible style. She had something close to 15,000 dresses, I believe, at the time of her death. So she was a quite the ruler. She also engaged in the 7 Years' War and was doing quite well into the 7 Years' War, which is important to note when you think about who succeeded her. And so let's think about who succeeded her. The 7 Years' War was fought against Prussia. They were allied with Austria and France, fighting against Prussia. And Russia was almost winning. They had occupied a great deal of Prussian territory under Elizabeth, and then when she died, things really took a change, and that's due to Peter III. Now, Empress Elizabeth had no children. She had a lover, of course, but no children at all. And so she was thinking about who would be her heir. And so if we come here, you can see who she chooses. It is the son of her beloved sister who passed away, Peter III. I think I said she died of smallpox. That's not true. She died of complications, I believe, of childbirth, because she died shortly after her son was born. But Peter III is her nephew, and she brings Peter III to the palace to have him educated. But Peter III was really being raised to be a Swedish monarch, not a Russian one. And this was an issue because he was a bit of a lunatic, and he was really not happy about being in Russia, and he didn't want to go. But Elizabeth needed to prepare an heir, and she wanted to be the one who prepared him. She wanted to educate him. But he was very, very resistant to that education. So in Catherine the Great, this is Peter III's soon-to-be wife, she writes about the sort of man he was, or sort of boy he was, and how he responded to education. So I'm going to read from her memoir. Now, let's go. No, translation. We don't need that. It's a very long note. Okay, there we go. So, there we go. Peter III's education was directed by Brumer, the Grand Marshal of the court and a Swede by birth, and under him were Grand Chamberlain Bergholz, author of the aforementioned journal, and 4 chamberlains, 2 of whom Adelfelt, the author of the history of Charles VII, and I don't know if you can read this. There we go. And Wachtmeister were Swedish, and the other 2, Wolf and Mardfeld, were from Holstein. They raised the prince for the throne of Sweden in a court that was too large for the country in which it was located, and that was divided into several factions which hated each other and vied to control the prince's mind. which each faction wanted to shape. As a result, these factions inspired in him the reciprocal hatred they felt against the individuals they opposed. The young prince politely detested Brumer and his overbearing way and accused the Grand Marshal of excessive severity. He despised Bergholz, who was Brumer's friend, and today Aunt Toady, and liked none of his attendants because they hampered him. So he was a very difficult child. And mind you, these are her memoirs, so this is written by Catherine the Great, obviously in translation. But from the age of 10, Peter III was partial to drink. So Catherine the Great is right away just saying, my husband, when he was a child, was a drunk. He had to make many public appearances and was never out of sight, day or night. Those he liked best during his child and the first years of his stay in Russia were his two old fillets. Okay. Brumer, as a result, all others were unhappy with this prince and even more with his entourage. Okay, so here it is. Once Empress Elizabeth had ascended to the throne of Russia, she sent Chamberlain Korff to Holstein to summon her nephew, whom the Prince Administrator sent off immediately, accompanied by Grand Marshal Brumer, Grand Chamberlain Bergholz, and Chamberlain Ducker, Brumer's nephew. The Empress's joy was great when he arrived. She left shortly thereafter for her coronation in Moscow. She was resolved to declare the prince her heir, but first he had to profess the Greek Orthodox faith. The enemies of Grand Marshal Brumer, notably Grand Chancellor blah blah blah, blah 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 blah. Okay, lots of people. She goes over all these people. There. Here it is. It was then that I heard it said among this assembled family that the young duke was inclined to drink, that his attendants found it difficult to prevent him from getting drunk at meals, that he was restive and hot-headed, did not like his attendants, and especially Brumer, and that otherwise he showed vivacity, but had a delicate and sickly appearance. Okay, and then here she describes his education. Peter III was thus declared Elizabeth's heir and the Grand Duke of Russia after he professed his faith according to the Greek Orthodox rite. The prince had been baptized and raised in the Lutheran faith, the most rigid and least tolerant, and since his childhood he has always been resistant to all instruction. I heard it said by his attendants that at Kiel it had required great effort to make him go to church on Sundays and feast days, and to make him perform devotional acts which were forced upon him, and that most of the time he acted irreligiously. His Imperial Highness took it into his head to dispute every point with Simon Theodorsky. Often his attendants were called in to cut shortly these bitter exchanges and to calm the prince's heated emotions. Finally, after much frustration, the prince submitted to the wishes of the Empress, her as aunt, although, whether from prejudice, habit, or contradictory spirit, he often made it known that he would have preferred to leave for Sweden rather than stay in Russia. Okay, now that's probably the most important part, that he wished to stay in Sweden. When he comes to power following the death of Catherine II, we will see that unfold with what he does in the 7 Years' War, how he ends it. I'm sorry, after the death of Empress Elizabeth, not Catherine II. He's married to Catherine II. But Empress Elizabeth right away knows that Peter III is a bit of a dum-dum, and he's not the perfect guy. And so she decides, well, what do? I marry him as quickly as possible. And so she marries him to Catherine the Great. I believe she's 15 when she gets married, and she comes from Germany. Holstein, I think. Let me see where she comes from. Let's see. Princess Sophie Auguste Frederique von Anhalt-Zerbst. That was her name. And she was a German princess. Let's see, is that what it was? Yes, she was a German princess born on 1729, married to Peter III in the hopes that she would bear a son that Elizabeth could then train to become emperor, because she didn't believe very much in Peter III at all. And so when Catherine the Great had her baby, Empress Elizabeth actually snatched him away. And the Empress spoke very negatively about that. I have the page, I think, here. Or Catherine the Great spoke very negatively about that, about the birth of her child, if I remember. Okay, so here's the reason she took her again, was to raise the boy to be emperor, because she didn't believe in Peter III at all. Okay, so this is where she gives birth to a son, and Empress Elizabeth takes him away. Finally, toward noon of the following day, September 20th, I bore a son. As soon as he was swaddled, the Empress had her confessor come in, and he gave the child the name Paul. After which the Empress immediately had the child taken by the midwife and told the midwife to follow her. I stayed on my sick bed. Now this bed was placed opposite a door through which I could see daylight. Behind me there were 2 large windows that closed poorly, and to the right and left of this bed 2 doors, one of which opened onto my dressing room, and the other occupied by Madame Vladislavova. As soon as the Empress had left, the Grand Duke also went his way, as well as Monsieur and Madame Shuvalov, and I did not see anyone again until the stroke of 3. I had perspired a great deal. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not full focused. Okay. I had perspired a great deal. Where was that? I asked Madame Vladislavova to change my linen and put me to bed. She told me that she did not dare. Let me focus. Okay. Several times she sent someone to look for the midwife, but she did not come. I asked to drink, but again I received the same response. Finally, after 3 hours, Countess Shuvalova arrived in all her finery. When she saw me still lying in the same place where she had left me, she exclaimed that this could kill me. This was a great consolation for me, as I had already been in tears from the moment I gave birth, especially because of the negligent way in which I had been poorly and uncomfortably put to bed after a difficult and painful labour, between doors and windows that closed poorly, with no one daring to carry me to my bed, which was 2 steps away, and I had not the strength to drag myself to it. Madame Shuvalova left immediately, and I think that she sent for the midwife. So, meanwhile, I was dying of fatigue and thirst. Finally, I was put in my bed, and I did not see a living soul the whole day, nor was anyone even sent to find out how I was. For his part, His Imperial Highness did nothing but drink with those whom he had around him. And the Empress busied herself with the child. In the city and in the empire, the joy over this event was great. And then she began to feel terrible, terrible pain. And no one really helped her, because all interest was for Paul, who Elizabeth wished to train to become Tsar. Elizabeth would die when Paul was 8, and it would not be Paul who rose to the throne, but rather Peter III, which would make Catherine the Great the Queen of Russia. And we're not going to go too much into the history of Catherine the Great. This book really talks about her experience before Peter III is coronated. But we're going to talk about how it falls, right? Peter III was not fond of Russia, and I think that's important to note from that early education. Because when he rises to the throne, he only ends up being on the throne for about 186 days, before Catherine the Great, with the help of the guard, overthrows him and puts him in prison, and then essentially kills him, though no one really knows the story isn't believed. They think that he was murdered or poisoned, but it says here that he died of hemorrhoids, and we'll look at that in a second. But so he, in his reign, he completely changed course on the 7 Years' War, which again, Russia had occupied Prussian territory. All sides of the war were very tired at this time, but he decided to make a treaty with Frederick the Great, with whom he was very almost in love with Frederick the Great. He was amazed by him, and he wanted to be friends with him, and he wanted to fashion himself after Frederick the Great. Prussia was such a military power, and he was very impressed by it. And so he decided to make a treaty with Prussia, whom they were fighting against for the purpose of expanding their territory. And so rather than continuing to fight, he quickly reversed course on everything Empress Elizabeth had been fighting for. And this was really shocking to the Russian Guard. They gave up their occupied territories back to Prussia and withdrew from the war, and even gave Russian soldiers to Prussia. So you can imagine this extreme reversal on policy was startling to the Russian military, and they immediately started to form alliances with Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great realized right away, when she watched Empress Elizabeth, and she was watching Peter III after he was king, she was noticing how to form relationships. And so she worked very hard while he was ruling to form relationships with the military in the hopes of overthrowing him. Peter III was very kind, they said, but kind in a way that appeared as a weakness. So in exile, he brought all the victims of earlier revolts from exile. It's almost as if he was doing everything he could to reverse what Empress Elizabeth had done. So there's a quote from one of those exiles who was brought to this great ballroom in the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg for these massive balls of all these political prisoners. "You are too kind," he said. "Russians do not understand kindness. You must rule by knout or axe. That is the only time everyone is happy." And so it was this kind of kindness and lack of strength that people perceived in Peter, and his immediate fall to Prussia when there was no reason for that fall to occur, that shocked the military, and so they supported Catherine the Great. And so let's go to the passage where we read about the coup. It's 10 to 11, so let's go there. All right, here it says, Peter III and his wife Catherine were great enemies. Alexander's great-grandparents were fashioning conspiracies against each other. He was planning to send her to a convent. She was planning to send him to the next world. She turned out to be a better planner. She received her secret lover, Guardsman Gregory Orlov, in the Winter Palace. Her lover had 4 brothers who were all courageous and beloved officers of the Guards. They became conspirators thanks to her relationship with the handsome officer. However, her body almost betrayed her. Now, this is a moment where I'm just not sure that this book is factually correct. Like, I don't know. I kind of trusted it because it's a published book. You think there wouldn't be wrong information in it, but some of it feels very salacious. Like this. Maybe it really happened this way. I should check, but here we go. Keep it with a grain of salt because I really don't trust this book all that much. Okay. However, her body almost betrayed her. Catherine became pregnant. Peter learned of this from his spies and decided to catch her giving birth. With proof of her infidelity, he could put her away in a convent. But Catherine solved the problem. When her time was due, she ordered a valet to set fire to his house. The childish Peter adored fireworks and fires. He took off with his retinue to watch the house burn down. Like, that's one of those moments where I think to myself, this is not a legitimate book, because I don't know how he could possibly know that I don't know, maybe his sources, I could look back to the source material, but this book just feels suspicious to me sometimes. Where's the bibliography? See, there isn't one. Oh, here it is. I don't know. Oh, I'm sorry, that clicking is my heater. Okay, but anyway, I think he probably went to see the house burn down because it was his house burning down. But the newborn was sneaked out of the palace wrapped in a beaver skin coat. By the time Peter returned, the iron-whittled little woman hemorrhaging met him calmly and even gave him coffee. Actually, I just don't know. I just don't know about that. But it says it in the book, so if you want a very salacious reading of Alexander II, this is the one to read. But I'm gonna read it, and I'm gonna give us an Alexander II video because he's very, very important. All right, so now the coup, right? Let's see. So Catherine basically, Alexander's wretched great-grandfather, Peter III, felt lost instantly. His courtiers fled shamelessly as the guard approached. Only the celebrated Field Marshal Christopher Minnick remained steadfast. The 70-year-old military man suggested sailing to the island of Kronstadt to impregnable naval form, blah, 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 blah. Peter broke down and wept. According to a contemporary account, old Field Marshal Minnick, overcome with indignation, shamed him. Can't your majesty die like an emperor before his troops? If you are afraid of a sword blow, hold a crucifix in your hands, and they won't dare harm you. But the emperor did not wish to die, and he surrendered obediently. Catherine imprisoned her spouse in the charming country seat of Rapsa. A contemporary wrote, Alexis Orlov, the brother of Catherine's lover, a giant with a cruel scar across his cheek, 2 meters tall, offered the former emperor a goblet of wine with poison. The wretch drank it, and flames coursed through his veins. This aroused suspicion in the overthrown emperor, and he refused the next glass. But they used force, and he defended himself. In that horrible struggle, in order to stifle his cries, they threw him on the ground and grabbed his throat. But he defended himself with the strength that comes with final desperation. And so they suffocated him, essentially. And then they said that he died of hemorrhoids. So I don't know if he actually died of hemorrhoids, but I think everyone believed that it was not that. Anyway, Catherine II, her affairs are well known, well documented, and her memoirs, of which I have here, which I have not read in full. When I do my video on Catherine the Great, I will have read these. So it might take a while because it's a lot of reading. But her memoirs essentially were all packaged up in a nice little bow for the next Tsar, and the next Tsar would be Paul, her son, who was mostly raised by Elizabeth until Elizabeth died at 8, and then was really kind of forgotten by his mother, Catherine. She didn't really have any interest in him. And so he would read them, and each Tsar would read them. And they were considered quite disturbing because they were very truthful about a woman's life. And she suggested that Paul was the son of one of her lovers and not the son of Peter III, and therefore was not a true Romanov. So people believed that there was a possibility that the Romanovs were not Romanovs at all. Though some say, and the prevailing opinion is that Paul is the son of Peter III, and that she was writing that to assure that Paul did not attempt to avenge his father's death and to go against all of Catherine the Great's people, essentially, and avenge them, which is exactly what happened. Paul was very loyal to his father. In that contentious relationship between Catherine and Peter, we can definitely say that Paul took the side of his mother. As you can see here, Paul actually had a child with his mistress, and his mother, Catherine, married the mistress to the son of a field marshal, and then forced her son to marry. So he had a very contentious relationship with a very controlling mother who was very flippant and uninterested in him. She was far more interested, he said, in her lovers than she was in him. And so Paul ended up being, let's look here, and this is who we'll finish with. We'll finish with Paul before we get to Alexander I. That's where we'll start the next video. But he essentially reestablished the law that the throne continues to the next male heir. Probably because Catherine would want Alexander I, her grandson, to take over rather than Paul. And so most of his policies were made against his mother, including all of her attempts at expansion. He was an anti-expansionist. So he changed military and foreign policy significantly. And that led to a kind of unpredictability that Peter III had also possessed. And so that really led to his demise. And so he was killed in 17. So let's read poor Paul's death. On 17, he's murdered and replaced with Alexander, his own son. So let's actually go back to this. We haven't looked at this in a while. Okay, so that's Catherine, Sophia. I'm sorry, no, that's not Catherine. Sophia was Catherine's great, but Catherine the Great is right there, Sophia. So a different Sophia is married to Paul I. And he has many children. He has Nicholas I, Anna, Catherine, Maria, Helena, Constantine, Alexander, and Louise. I'm sorry, that's Alexander's wife. So Alexander actually supports this coup, not knowing that his father will be killed. He didn't really understand that. But he becomes emperor from 1801 to 1825, and a very fascinating emperor at that. Alexander I, and then is succeeded by Nicholas I, who is the really violent one, who we're really going to get into next video. But he is directly involved, or indirectly we might say, in his father's death, which occurs on page 17, and it's how we'll end today. A little bit dark, but that's okay. Okay. At midnight, the drunken guard officers approached the secret entrance to Mikhailovsky Castle. Among them were Catherine the Great's lover, Platon Zubov, and his brother Nicholas. They were led by Paul's favorite adjutant. The conspiracy was headed by Count Perpalin, another of the emperor's favorite. Peter Palin, sorry. In dress uniform, sword bared, they burst into Paul's bedroom. Paul seemed to have escaped, which meant the end for them. While the officers panicked, one of the leaders, General Leonti Benigson, there's so many names, Benigson, I don't know, tall and phlegmatic, leaned again on the mantelpiece and looked around calmly. There were drapes in the corner of the enormous room. The general saw the sovereign's bare feet sticking out from beneath the drapes. And then they pulled him out, and they beat him to death, and then said that he died of apoplexy. Apoplexy? I don't know what that really means. I'm sorry. There's a lot that missed me today. And so they said he died essentially of natural causes, but there it says, in Russia everything is secret, but nothing is unknown. And so it was certainly known to everyone. A cat visit. It was certainly known to everyone that he was killed. And Alexander I, rises to the throne. Now, Paul became a bit of a legend, and he was said to be seen by the Romanovs individually on the nights before major events, usually terrible major events. So the premonition was common, and he would haunt his favorite castle in Gatchina. And there was said to be a room that was locked. Inside was the bed from the castle, with the blankets and pillows stained by the murdered emperor's blood. And so his ghost was known or said to haunt that room. So he certainly a very dark way to end. And the Romanov family was just plagued with death. And Russians have a tendency to murder their leaders. And the Romanovs were the ones who experienced this most. So we're going to learn about Alexander I, who was one of those people with the Romanovs. You could think about Anastasia. There are always those theories that they didn't die but just disappeared and were living somewhere as ordinary people. Alexander I was one of those legends that he wasn't dead but living out his life somewhere. And so we'll learn about that. We'll learn about Nicholas and Alexander II in our next video. And we'll do a whole video for Nicholas II because that is the end of the Romanov Empire. That's important to do. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this. If you did and you want to join the membership and read this with me, please do. Part 3 is coming out on Sunday or this weekend, so we've made it quite a bit of a way. I'm already on page 329, so we're getting through it. So please join me with reading this. It's fun. All right, everyone have a wonderful night, and I'll see you later.